Hey everyone, and thanks for coming. It's a shocking day, but good cause. Jane Hansen, there's a lot of talk about her articles and Claire Harvey's and Mamma Mia and the like. Now, Jane Hansen stupidly suggested last week that I was a conspiracy theorist. Now, one of the last things a Murdoch employee should be talking about is conspiracies. So I was going to talk about vaccine today, but I thought, well, we've got a lot of people talking about vaccines, so let's go through Murdoch's criminal history in this country and the UK and Syria and the Palestine and Israel, and let's have a real look at how seriously this situation is either a conspiracy, realistically or theoretically. Now, I'd say that one of the two major screw-ups of the last, our generation have been the Iraq wars. Personally, I think, my personal favourite Iraq war was Iraq II, Saddam Hussein's weapon of mass destruction, the Empire Returns. Now, I'll just give you a few quotes of Mr. Murdoch's. Mr. Murdoch publicly supported this war and pushed for it on every occasion, every day. This is what Mr. Murdoch had to say about the war at the time, and his great friend at the time, Tony Blair. I wonder if his opinions have changed today. Murdoch said, "I give my full backing to the war," and he praised George Bush as acting morally and correctly, and described Tony Blair as full of guts for going out on a limb in his support for the Iraq war. I'm not too sure he's saying that Tony Blair is full of guts today. I don't think that they're very good friends anymore, but apparently his ex-wife said that Mr. Blair had a very nice arse. In relation to the war, and this is where it gets interesting for Murdoch, we can't back down now. I think Bush is acting very morally and very correctly. And I think he's going to go on with it. The greatest thing to come out of this for the world economy would be for oil at $20 a barrel. That's bigger than any tax cut in any country. So Mr. Murdoch was happy to see over 1 million innocent Iraqi children, men and women killed for $20 a barrel oil. Do you really think he gives a crap about your children? Do you really think that Murdoch's in this no jab, no pay rule for... No, right on topic, it's about conspiracies, jerk. Go back to work. Do you really think Mr. Murdoch cares about your children when he's publicly supported the death and destruction of millions of Iraqi children? And while we're on the topic of war, what a lot of people don't also realise is that Mr. Murdoch has some very interesting links to the Syrian crisis at the moment. Mr. Murdoch is involved in a company called Genie Energy. Now, if you go and look up Genie Energy and look up who's on the advisory board and who benefits from Genie Energy, you'll find one of the greatest war criminals of our time on the advisory board of that. Dick Cheney is his name. I hope you all remember him. Also on that board is James Woolsey. He's a CIA director. You've also got a guy by the name of Jacob Rothschild on that board. Now what they are doing now is trying to drill for oil and shale gas in occupied territories which the United Nations doesn't recognise as Israeli land. It's in Syria, and it's very important to this company. So Mr. Murdoch's journos might want to call us terrorists and baby killers, but if you actually want to go and have a look at a terrorist and a baby killer, look no further than Murdoch's companies and what they're doing right now in the Middle East and what they've done in that Middle East for a long time. Now, getting back closer to point, let's look at Mr. Murdoch's involvement with a company called GSK. They happen to manufacture the MMR vaccine, which we're all familiar with, which has been known to cause a lot of problems. It was Mr. Murdoch's newspaper, in particular through a journalist by the name of Brian Deere, that decided they were going to attack some research and the study done by a doctor by the name of Andrew Wakefield. And in this study, Dr. Wakefield, all he said was further investigation was required into the link between autism and the MMR vaccine. Another conspiracy Mr. Murdoch involved himself with, and who could forget it, was the hacking of dead children and kidnapped children's telephones in the UK and the United States. In fact, this was Senator John D. Rockefeller's report in Congress. The reported hacking by News Corporation newspapers against a range of individuals, including children, is offensive and a serious breach of journalistic ethics. This raises serious questions about whether the company has broken US law, and I encourage the appropriate agencies to investigate to ensure that Americans have not had their privacy violated. I am concerned that the admitted phone hacking in London by News Corporation may have extended to 9/11 victims or other Americans. If they did, the consequences will be severe. Well, as we know, Mr. Murdoch was found guilty in the UK of all of that, and what came out of it? Nothing. Bit of a slap on the wrist, week in jail for a few of his cohorts, and nothing more was heard of it. So, Mr. Murdoch's journalists should be reminded that the last thing that they really need to talk about is conspiracies, because if you actually go to look at what Mr. Murdoch's done and his involvement, his stain on Western democracy over the last 30 years has been nothing short of criminal. 13 years ago, this was for depression in children. Depression in children, you know, you'd think you wouldn't go near it with a 10-foot barge pole anyway, but no, they decided there was a bit of money to be made there. Now, after the longest investigation in the history of US drugs regulation, it was found that GSK had withheld important data about safety and effectiveness that put children all around the world at risk. Now, does this sound like some other situations that we're dealing with in the moment in pharmaceutical companies? This isn't a conspiracy, this is a fact. This is a company that manufactures the MMR vaccine and has been found to have been withholding data in regards to safety and efficacy that put children at increased risk of suicide. So, through this you can understand the philosophy of these types of companies. Now, Murdoch's link to the company, of course, was his son James was on the board. His son James was on the board during that disgraceful period in GSK's time. So look, I won't keep you any longer out here. It's a hot day, but just a word of advice for Mr. Murdoch and his journos. Try and keep conspiracies out of it, because I've only read out half my speech today of Mr. Murdoch and what actually went on. And definitely try not to use the word baby killers and terrorists in regards to anti-vaccine activists, because Mr. Murdoch has got a lot more blood on his hands than anyone standing here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brett Smith. Amazing.